We're here on our third episode discussing the Enneads by Plotinus. Today we'll be discussing on dialectic, which is section 1.3. My name's Sylvia, and I'm here with my good friend Jeff as we discuss the complex nature of this book again. But today, thankfully for you guys, maybe we'll be discussing a much shorter chapter, but maybe not any less difficult to understand.
It's definitely challenging, as the earlier chapter on virtue was. So as we both discovered reading on dialectic, this is short, it's concise, but it's also challenging as well. And it's a continuation of the earlier material on the process of purification. And here dialectic, it has a specific Platonic sense of understanding or progressing from the sensible understanding of things, the sensible perception, to the intellectual. So it's a process of starting from a certain point and then working towards ascension, toward the intellect, and then ideally beyond that to the one. So in this here, he also discusses its relationship also to philosophy, because philosophy is not the end all in this system of thought presented by Plotinus. So I thought that this is really getting to the point where after you have cultivated virtue, and even before that, once you have an understanding of the cosmology presented by Plotinus, then you're able to be in a position where you can start to grasp higher wisdom. And so not just of the sensible world. So you can use mathematics, you can use science and so forth to understand the sensible world. But in order to go beyond that, you need to acquire theoretical wisdom. And to do that, you have to go beyond the sensible world. So this is effectively saying, kind of analogous to the cave analogy, that the forms that we perceive are not the reality, but rather they're just basically shadows, or they're images of a higher reality. And we have to use tools in order, or a basis, foundation of knowledge, in order to get to the forms, the real forms at the intellectual level, and then beyond that also to orient ourselves toward the one, so the ultimate principle. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I'd say that, especially at the beginning of the chapter, this goes, I guess, like hand in hand with the concept of virtues and purification. It's not so much, in my mind, in addition to it, but a chapter that kind of goes into technique on how to, or like the beginning of technique on how to actually go there, because he presents us with 3 different levels before we even get to philosophy or the philosopher. He describes 2 other types of people or categories, which are the musician and the lover, which I take to not necessarily have to be absolutely musicians or lovers, but he kind of describes how certain personality types, 2 types of people are maybe predisposed to being able to get to a point where they can, reach purification, reach that higher level, or start to work toward virtue, and then therefore assimilate, and therefore reach the intelligible world. But they need to be led. They need more help. And then there's a 3rd category, which is the philosopher, which he thinks, not that they don't need help, but they're already primed. Their personality, their characteristics are already such that they understand what the journey is, or what they need to be working toward. And so to briefly touch upon the first type, the first 2 types, he speaks of the musician and gives, this is probably actually kind of, at least the first part, the most straightforward chapter so far. He gives examples of the musician being someone capable of appreciating beautiful things, or specifically beautiful sounds. But I think this can be used also for other arts. It doesn't have to be music. I think you can extend this to all the other kinds of arts. Or like people who have an appreciation of the aesthetic in the world in various ways, to a significant degree, I believe. That's my understanding. And that at least they are already aware of appreciating the impression of beauty, that beautiful things around them. They just need to basically be led to understand that those things are just an impression. They are not actually beauty themselves.
Right.
And
Not the form of beauty.
right. And so therefore he's primed at least to understand the form of beauty. And through, I guess, guidance, he can start to realize that all the examples of beauty in music or in the arts are not the thing itself. So that he will move beyond just appreciating particular examples and appreciate all beauty, or be more focused on the idea of beauty as a concept, and then therefore be able to, like, intellectually, in the general sense of the term intellectually, move forward with that. I feel like his explanation of the lover was a little bit more not clear, but gave a little bit more, there was a little more meat there. So I'm not quite sure what he means by the lover, but it sounds like a physical lovers, because he starts by saying that the lover is someone who appreciates the beauty or the goodness in bodies. Now, bodies can mean different things as used in this book specifically. But even if we were to use the example of like human bodies, like someone who is attracted to the flesh or to the beauty in other people and is interested in, carnal or romantic relations, or even simply the aesthetic, the visceral appreciation of physical beauty. He talks about they're therefore also primed to see the beautiful, but they need to be educated to understand that what they see as beautiful in one body or another is identical. It's just the impression of the same beauty as it's impressed upon different people. And he goes a step further, which I thought was quite useful, in explaining that beyond bringing this to the attention of the person and kind of, in a way, it is kind of cognitive behavioral therapy, where it's like bringing to the forefront the reality of something and kind of reaffirming it. I think a lot of the early stuff in trying to get to assimilation is kind of what in today's world we would call cognitive behavioral therapy, but primed toward this route. Anyways, the next thing he brings up in regards to the lover is that it would be good to get them interested in or observing of beauty in things such as customs, or things that aren't visual or physical, different aspects, abstract aspects of culture, I would say, like customs, perhaps rituals, philosophy, literature, things that are abstract and that they're not visceral. And that will start helping them disattach themselves from the idea that beauty is some physical thing. They'll start understanding it'll be like a stepping stool toward understanding beauty as an incorporeal thing.
Right.
And slowly they can then start making their way toward purification and assimilation. And the third person, the last, which he doesn't spend as much time on, or maybe I didn't, he gets a little more vague in my opinion, is the philosopher. He says the philosopher is already primed because they're already aware that the concepts exist, that the forms exist, that we're just seeing impressions of things. They kind of know what the problem is. They're like self-aware enough. They're like, okay, but now how do I get from A to B? That's the next, that's like kind of the final step. And from there, he kind of starts talking about how philosophy, as you mentioned, and dialectical nature, both so maybe you mentioned him talking about dialectics in more the Platonic sense. I was reading it more as the use of dialectics in the philosophical sense of, instead of giving into emotions or such, actually using discursive thought, which comes from the soul, to be able to reach truths through a dialogue without letting anything irrational, like without using irrational motives as the, like the results of your argument.
Yeah, there's also a sort of therapeutic effect to this, I believe, because that's what the point of this is purification. So if you understand beauty is a form, that it's an idea, that it's not something that is an inherent property of something material, then you'll be less likely to be coerced by these things. Like I'm,
Hmm.
for example, very much drawn by the beauty of a work of art, or I'm drawn by the beauty of another person. And I don't think Plotinus would say that's inherently bad,
No.
but for many people, it does become something that results in irrational or self-destructive behaviors. Or maybe even we could look at it another way, that the self-preservation of beauty, so generally beauty fades with age and also with the natural decay of the human body, but then people will go to all sorts of lengths to preserve that beauty, whether it be like through, use of drugs, or surgery, and it also will create fear and so forth, the fear of losing one's
And the suffering
youthful
of
beauty.
not seeing perhaps that there is still beauty there, and they're just not seeing it because they're so focused or biased to a certain idea of beauty. And I think another thing, as you're talking about, it's not bad. It's just you need to move beyond just seeing that. Or
Mhm.
I feel like that made me think it's also more like, yes, the school of life or the school of existence, where when you're in school, say in mathematics, you don't want to stop at arithmetic or just algebra, or whatever other topic, but let's use math as an example.
Mhm.
Because after a while, if you stop there, if it is something, if that's like all your, like, if that is your focus, let's use that as this is a given, you're going to become stagnant. You're going to become unhappy with it. And it's not enough. Like, knowing algebra isn't bad, but the point
Right.
is you should get to calculus and you should get to trig, which,
Right.
do you see what I'm saying? Like, understanding beauty, the impressions of beauty, and appreciating them for what they are, it's wonderful, but you can't just stay there. You need to move forward and understand the bigger picture as this
Mhm.
builds up, like a kind of an an educational progression on a metaphysical level,
Right. Right. It's the gradual progression
as
that's
far as
outlined here.
wisdom is
Right.
concerned.
Right. The cultivation of wisdom, and also your own understanding, your evolution, your ascension,
Hmm.
assimilation. I mean, these are the sort of words that are used. So, like he does say that, the philosopher um, should do mathematics, but then after the mathematics, he should go to dialectics.
Right, exactly. Good point. So the point at which he starts talking about the philosopher, or not when he starts talking about him, but the next steps in that,
Mm.
he kind of loses me a little bit, or it starts getting a little vague. I don't know if there's more clarity there than I understood. He just says he should, like, learn math, which makes sense, and because of the abstract and absolute nature of mathematics. Well, that's a whole other argument, because there's a lot of like mathematics going on now which are not true, but that's a whole separate topic. But that he should learn math because I'm assuming because it's not material, it's sustainable in the sense that it is true regardless. It is not tied to the corruption of time,
Hmm.
and it's probably the closest grasping that a human can have to, like, the forms, to the Platonic forms, in that they are they're
Right.
true things. They're just what they are. It's not a manifest. You can
Right.
apply mathematics, but mathematics itself is not of this material world specifically. It has impressions in the way that the material world works, but the ideas are not. I think that they're the closest, or maybe part of the intelligible. They are part of the intelligible world, pure
Mhm.
mathematics.
Right. Oh, they would be.
And
Yeah,
yeah,
numbers would have to be. Um, but I suppose from the level of the intellect, though, the serialization of numbers and
yeah,
sequences and formulas and so forth would not be active in the same sense as they are in material reality. That leads to a whole other
yeah,
matter of questions, whole other set of questions. I mean, what is the role of mathematics in reality? I mean,
a lot.
according in materialist science, we know that as a fact that numbers predict accurately the outcome of many phenomena. Many phenomena are predicted quite accurately based on mathematics, and so you can also reduce chemical reactions also to mathematics, and velocity and physics and so forth. It's all founded on mathematics. But then at a subjective level, in like in the matter of mind, what exactly are numbers? So material reality seems to be governed heavily, if not predominantly, by numbers. But the mind, if we assert that the mind is not a material entity, that it's more than just like a biophysical process contained in the brain, then how do numerical predictions work? And can you actually numerically predict what a person will do or not? Or is it entirely outside the realm of mathematics? I mean, is there a role of numbers in the soul, in the mind?
Well, I would say that numbers as we conceive of them, perhaps 1, 2, 3, etc., they're just impressions of whatever they actually are in the intelligible, because we have to, one, like the very fact that we give them a name, we give them a metric, we give them a word, they are just a symbol of something that we otherwise cannot even conceive of, I think, if that makes any sense. When we are actually using math in the real world. But the idea of math, I think, is pure math.
Right.
Is in the intelligible world. The way that we can interact with it,
right.
I think, is here. Like, we can't understand math beyond the way we interact with it, and even that seems very abstract to us.
Well, maybe the the analogy of the cave, and so the men who are chained to the cave and they see shadows, and that's all they see until one of them breaks free and sees the origin of those shadows. So with numbers, it's something that we're exposed to, we can work with, but then is there something beyond that? I mean, that would be a discussion with the Pythagorean school,
right?
I think,
yeah,
as well, which of course somebody like Plotinus would not have been unfamiliar with. But in any case, the Plotinus here is saying that the philosopher should study mathematics, but then move to dialectic.
So what do you think that is? Because don't you need dialect? I mean, do we want to define dialectics here? The definition I have, and give me your definition if it differs. I wrote, it's a form of philosophizing where the different points of view are argued or debated by trying to arrive to truth through a reasoned argumentation, not appealing to rhetoric or emotions.
Well, that's one definition of dialectics. In the Platonic sense, generally, as I understand it, it is effectively the method through which you go from, or you transition from the sensible to the intellectual, particularly understanding, or it's the study of the divine, it's the study of the forms, effectively.
But how is that dialectical at all? I'm assuming it's some more elevated concept of dialectic as it is used.
It's a different definition from how it's used in other contexts.
So does he cover it? I mean, I guess he must have.
Yeah, he says,
cover it here.
Right. So he says here, section 134. What is this dialectic that should also be given to those previously mentioned? It is actually the capacity to say what each thing is and in what way it differs from other things, etc., etc.
But isn't that really isn't it using the same tool that I described, but towards very specific higher purposes? Because I guess, how are you discerning these things? I'm assuming he means that it is the discerning of these things, either in a dialogue with another, or I suppose in a dialogue with yourself. I don't know why. I don't know why he would use the word dialectic if it's by yourself, which it very well could be. But yes, I mean, that to me sounds similar. It's just
well, it's like the process.
I mean, like technically, how is it any different in how you would go about it?
Well, I guess the example would be what we discussed earlier of beauty. Is you start with looking at what is beauty, and you can see that it's at a basic sensorial level, it's applicable and it's experienced. But then we want to step away and ask, well, what is the beauty? And does
Well, that is
beauty,
dialectics, though. That's like the
that's what,
general debate concept of dialectics.
right? Okay, I don't think
I
we're
think
in
we're
opposition,
aggressively agreeing.
right?
Well, I'm aggressively agreeing.
Right. I think we're in agreement about that. But
Okay.
whether that technically requires a discussion or not.
It can just be a discussion between, I guess, in a sense, like between our lower self and our higher self as we slowly are real. And I'm getting, I'm getting a little woo woo, not woo woo, but like I'm getting a little fuzzy here. It's not what he's
Mhm.
saying, but to me, it kind of feels like, yes, as you're doing this, it is in a sense a dialectic between, what you understand when your material embodied self is more at the wheel, and as you start having kind of an internal discussion with your higher self or your,
Mhm.
the soul, the embodied, the higher self, the higher part of the embodied soul.
Mhm.
Okay. So yeah. So I also thought it was interesting. Well, I guess that was my first question. So okay, I guess we did answer it. I guess
Mhm.
you use like lower level dialectics to learn math, but then he expects us to move forward and use dialectic for these other things. Once you understand the nature of math, or then you can start understanding the true nature of things and forms in general. That's the next step. And
Right.
what they have in common or not, which goes back to the Theaetetus as well, where he talks about where Plato talks about differences and sameness, I think, or whatever terms he uses.
So Plotinus says that the mathematical study should actually be given to him that will habituate him to having a grasp of and confidence in the incorporeal, for he will receive this easily, given that he is a lover of learning. And so
I'm terrible at math. Maybe after I finish reading this book, I
you
can
can,
have Cameron teach me math, because he's very good at it. And 3 seconds in, I'm just like,
well, it's interesting that he's associating mathematics with the incorporeal, which would make sense at
of course.
at a certain level. Now, from a materialist point of view, I mean, I'm sure materialist philosophers can discuss at length how numbers relate to matter, because mathematics is the underlying foundation for the hard sciences, and it accurately predicts the outcome of all sorts of
Right, but I think that the
phenomena.
sciences, or the things that are practical, that the practical application of math, or the sciences that can then found themselves on math, I think it's maybe, if not the same, but a similar relationship between the forms and the impressions of the forms in this world. I think true math is not it's not something we can perceive here, but its impression flows down, and that is, and then
Mhm.
further flows like the impression flows down, and then the generation aspect is its application, or how it's actually really there in aspects of nature, in biology, in cosmology,
Right.
astrophysics,
Hmm.
etc. I agree with him on this. I guess I already said that at length earlier, but I kind of agree with that math is definitely, if not already in the intelligible realm, that bridge, feel like it's a bridge between the divine. It's like, I've always thought that math is a bridge between the divine and the material, or the divine and man. I'm
Hmm.
sure that's, I mean, isn't that, I'm sure that's what, well, the Pythagoreans did think it was divine
Hmm.
in a
Hmm.
sense. So that's, yeah, so he thinks it's a good way to like prime yourself to start thinking in a certain kind of way, so that
Right.
we can discuss what is and what isn't.
There's a sort of contradiction from how mathematics is approached today, because mathematics is at the core of materialist science, for example, whereas he's proposing that mathematics is at the core of dialectics, where
Well, I don't
it's
know.
the
I mean, yes,
foundation from which, so you have to encourage the person to step beyond the corporeal, and so you get them to study mathematics.
there's definitely a difference between applied math and there's so many different categories of, or fields of, and disciplines of mathematics. There's definitely, from what I was exposed to, a lot of theoretical mathematics that is still in the realm of truth, that is definitely out there. It is not about here.
Right.
That is my interpretation, and I'm sure there's mathematicians out there who will really disagree with me, but I think there's some out there that will definitely agree with me as well. It's just that's a matter of people choose to see things in a way that is consistent with their belief of things. But there's a lot of theoretical mathematics, which is, I think, in phrased differently, about the it's about not the material. I don't know how else to say it. But neither of us are math. I can barely do algebra and calculus, so
Right.
I'm not going to talk about math beyond what we just said. So
right, but the takeaway from this is that Plotinus is suggesting that you study mathematics in order to orient yourself and gain confidence in the incorporeal.
the point of this is that all those memes where kids are saying, "Why did I learn algebra in school?" This is I've never used it again. Yeah, that's because you're not trying to transcend. Once you start trying to assimilate, you'll find that all those math classes from high school were very useful.
Right. That's a good point. That's a good point. I mean, I wish I had paid more attention in my high school.
Most math teachers are terrible. Like at a high school level, I'm gonna get so many haters. I'm just like, just smearing everybody. I'm gonna get a million hate mail from math teachers.
Oops.
Oh well, I can handle it. So he moves on beyond that, and he says, so like we've already said, so we can start understanding the difference between things and the difference between things and what they have in common. And then he says, what is good and not good? So that's a loaded term. I'm assuming that when he says good or not good, he's not talking about that in the sense of ethics or like or like a morality. I think he's talking about what is actually the good or what is closer to the good versus what is not, or like what is intelligible versus what is material. Or what was your take on that?
I'm not sure. I think probably reference to the original Greek text would indicate whether that's referring to the good as in the one, the divine. But in this case, it could be a discussion of what is preferable and unpreferable. Because at the same time, too, if beauty is a form, then so is ugliness as well. In this cosmology, it's not that the forms are only things that we would find agreeable, but there's also the disagreeable forms as well. But so you also distinguish between those two. But I think at a sort of therapeutic level too. So he's discussing beauty, and so you take an analysis of, well, why do I find this beautiful and this to be ugly? And so you think about the differences, and you eventually will come to the realization that what you're looking at is basically images or impressions on matter that are reflections of something that's higher, of a metaphysical reality. So by virtue of doing that too, you're also stepping away from, for example, tendencies towards revulsion and the sort of psychological effects of being overly attached to also things that are disagreeable or bad at the same time. I mean, that's my impression of this, because this whole process is meant to be therapeutic in nature. It's not learning it for the sake of just learning it. It's not pedantic.
Right.
Yeah, that's my impression of it.
And the next thing he says is how many beings there are. So why is that important? What does he mean by that? And well, he says how many beings there are and what is everlasting through scientific understanding. But
right.
The first part, how many beings there are, what do you think he's trying to say there, and how is it actually pertinent?
Well, I don't think it's any sort of like reference to omniscience. I think it's just a sense of using your mind to discern different beings. And here, I don't think you're talking about people, but rather distinguishing all of the different reflections of the forms in reality.
So like everything. So like from daemons to a plant. Like, is that what you mean? Like being able to discern between everything? Like different, like, or is he talking about like a scientific, natural science understanding of different things, like understanding minerals, plants,
No,
animals, bacteria.
or alternatively, what he means is different levels of being at the different levels of reality. So at the level of material reality, soul, intellect, etc.
Okay.
Reference.
He has it capitalized being, so.
Right. This is an instance where I think reference to the original Greek would help, but unfortunately I don't read Greek, so I can't.
Right. But this copy does have Greek definitions in the back for anybody listening who is capable of reading ancient Greek. Wait, so you think that by beings he means understanding the different levels of being as a verb, like what you can be, like from the material and transcending up? Or
Right. Like, for example, a beautiful human form is one type of being, and then there is the yearning for it that emerges, which is at the level of the soul, and then there's the form at the intellectual level. So you would call those different beings, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure what precisely this means, and unfortunately we have to rely on a translation, which is, I think, good, but in cases like this you would want to look at the original source language in order to clarify the precise meaning.
okay, 1.3.4, like 4 lines down or whatever. It's a long sentence. It is actually the capacity to say to say what each thing is and in what way it differs from other things and what it has in common with them. And there's a footnote there that refers to Plato's Republic, and in what and where each of these is, and if it is what it is, and how many beings there are, plural.
Mm-hmm.
Again, and how many non-beings there are, different from beings. So I don't know.
We have to clarify. We have to
track.
clarify what beings means in order to really understand this.
Right. I was trying to see if there wasn't, if like the context of the section would shed any light. Dialectic converses about what is good and not good. And such things are classified under the good, and such things are classified under the opposite. And clearly about what is everlasting and what is not so. I don't know. Like, I don't know. The way that he says, he doesn't say the nature, what is being and what is not being. What he's talking about different beings. There's like a plurality that I don't think it's a verb. I think it's a noun. I guess we'd have to look into that. But my reading of this is that he's talking about different types of beings in every sense, not just what I already described as what would be covered by the natural sciences, such as animal life, vegetable life, etc., but even higher levels of being, which are outside of or adjacent to the material things that are not embodied. So everything from bacteria to non-embodied entities was my understanding of this, and something that one would, I assume, start understanding or perceiving or knowing of as they purify and are assimilated to a higher level.
Okay, so in the English glossary of key terms, beings and beings are the terms used generally for the entirety of the intelligible world apart from the one. But being also refers to one of Plato's greatest genera. The term beings, is used most comprehensively for all that exists in the intelligible world and in the sensible world. When used for the latter, it refers to the result or product of generation or production of becoming. So existence.
I think that's what I was saying, Moral. I think that's what I was saying.
But so it's not specifically talking about sentient being.
No, all of it.
Right, but all of it.
Like anything below the one, pretty much.
Right.
That's what I figure, that he's like, basically, it's like the goal here is to reach a point where you have an understanding kind of all aspects of reality, all the different parts that make up reality, all the different beings, sentient, non-sentient, embodied, non-embodied.
So yeah, everything that exists in the intelligible world, the sensible world, And when it's talking about the sensible world, it's the result or product of generation.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
to become, to be, right.
So it's kind of a marriage between a marriage between the sensible world and the metaphysical world, where you're like, you need all of it. You need to like understand all of it and kind of, in a sense, kind of approach both spheres in a similar manner, which is very different than how the contemporary world even looks at things at all.
Right. Well, there's a preference for essentially founding our perception of the world based on matter in the present day because of the materialist worldview that predominates our present day.
But this kind of puts everything not on the same level, but that the human, we as we are investigating this, should investigate it also in different ways, but also at a certain point, you need to start perceiving it in the same manner.
Right.
Or like investigating it in the same manner and not differentiating it, because in reality, they're really not different. They are different, but they're not different. Well, in that they're all fundamentally emanations of the one. That
right.
they all,
they're all
or like in a different way, that both things both categories of things, sensible and intelligible, truly exist.
Yeah.
We just live in that's my main point.
Right.
And that's what I mean. Like, not like being like, oh, he's not saying we can only investigate that which is being in the sensible world, and everything else we can kind of just ponder romantically. No, once you start purifying, you can like start perceiving and investigating rationally the truth of everything.
Right. And so you start with the sensible world and you work your way up.
And that was, I think, in the 1700s, one of the major schisms of thought between rationalists and empiricists. Was the rationalists, I think, were still continuing from a legacy of kind of more of this mentality, because they thought you didn't need it, like empiricism didn't cover it. You needed, and may not even be presenting true facts. It could be the illusion of the sensible world.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's in as you say, like, it's not that we're ignoring the sensible world in favor of the intelligible world. It's just that there are different aspects, there are different levels of expression of the one. But you have to start from the sensible and then work your way up. And then I think the process of doing this is meant to be therapeutic. And one of the results of this will just be virtue, which is what he talks about later in this chapter. This idea that, well, towards the very end of it, he's saying that he poses the question: is it possible for the lower virtues to be present without dialectic and theoretical wisdom? Yes, but imperfectly and deficiently. So that means if you do have an understanding of dialectic and theoretical wisdom, then the lower virtues will be perfect and not deficient, that they'll be completed. So this is why you will become a wiser, better person if you understand this sort of material, this sort of theory. So theorizing about the nature of the sensible world, and then understanding that what you're perceiving can be understood at a higher level. And then it's through this whole process of dialectic where you study the forms and your own reactions to them and your own cherished conceptions of things, that you drop away a lot of negative habits, and also using Stoic terminology, I think the passions as well, pathos. So, pathological, afflictive emotions, and also self-destructive or, harmful tendencies as well, because your mind will be governed more and more by reason rather than impulse and the sort of emotions that are very deeply tied to the sensible world. That's my impression of this.
Right. And he says, dialectical and theoretical wisdom, moreover, provide all universal and immaterial considerations that are for use by practical wisdom. So that is it what you already said? Yeah, you can have the lower virtues without dialectical and theoretical wisdom, but it'll be imperfect. So the kind
Right.
of philosophy he's talking, the kind of dialectical wisdom he's talking about is that which will provide information about all universal and immaterial considerations.
So there's, as going back to the earlier chapter, there are civic virtues, and the more you orient yourself toward the forms and toward the one, the more perfect these civic virtues will be, and then you can go beyond that into a
Right.
higher set of virtues, which are commensurate with higher wisdom.
And
So,
as he says, your natural virtues or your civic virtues will also be further perfected as
right.
you continue to try to grasp the higher virtues / philosophize dialectically in the manner in which he's describing it here. And that's kind of where he ends on just
And
this
I think
symbiotic relationship between the two.
my impression of this too, my takeaway from this is that effectively what happens when you orient yourself towards this higher metaphysical reality is a lot of your mammalian instincts are left behind, not abandoned entirely, but in the same sense that you don't get addicted to beauty, and
They're just not the priority anymore.
they're not the priority. So for example, if you're very much enmeshed in material reality, you'll be drawn very heavily, passionately towards beauty, and you'll be, feel nothing but revulsion toward ugliness. And then that will basically have you wandering around the world without any sort of orientation beyond seeking what is good, seeking what is preferable, and avoiding what is not preferable. And so these sort of things no longer become a priority. And then with your mind governed by reason, then you'll also be oriented toward the truth. And then if you're oriented toward the truth, in most circumstances, you will avoid anti-truth, so to speak. So you will, speak, what is true, and you will avoid what is false. You will also do things that are in the best interest of your community, which in most civic circumstances means not cheating, not lying, not stealing, and being like an overall, benevolent person toward others, being trustworthy, being dependable, etc. So the civic virtues. And then if you do gradually accumulate this higher wisdom, then, as you say, the sort of base mammalian instincts we have and the emotions we have are no longer a priority, because your mind is oriented.
I want to specify when I said it's no longer a priority. What I mean is the mammalian instincts are no longer a priority in the sense of prioritizing them as your intellectual goals, or your goals as your meaning of life, or because I don't want to say you shouldn't be prioritized at all. They should be prioritized in certain aspects of preservation and maintenance of a healthy life as far as that we are embodied. I think what we're talking about, and I just want to make this clear to people, that we're not, or at least I'm not, suggesting that we should become pure ascetics to the point where we let our bodies go.
Mm-hmm.
When we say that the mammalian instincts are no longer, we don't prioritize them as the actual intellectual or loftier goals of existence. I think that's what we're fundamentally meaning, or they should not be the underpinning meaning of our life.
Right. And so to use an example from this chapter, you have to prioritize writing before you can understand literature.
Right.
And it's not that you abandon writing, it's just that you no longer see the study of writing itself a priority once you delve into literature, because now you have understanding of letters and words and you're literate. So
correct.
In the experience of reality as a human being, as an embodied being, you can, at a certain stage, step beyond this material, sense-based world of passions and addictions and all sorts of coercive instincts, and then work towards something higher. And it doesn't mean that you abandon, as you say, you don't abandon your physical form and everything. It's just that it's something that you have gone beyond.
I would
So,
go so far as saying that addictions or aspects of the physical world that do become noxious to us is because the stagnation in the material world, I think, causes a lot of the suffering of the material world. That's my take. And so therefore no aspect in moderation or correctly applied of the material world is wrong. Like, you should know how to read and understand the basics of grammar. It's not bad. It's never bad to know that.
Mhm.
But like, I don't know, the people who get like, that's as far as they go. They just become super. I don't know. I don't want to start actually dissing people who study grammar, but just, you got to move beyond that if you want to grow, because becoming super obsessed with just one particular that doesn't actually take you to any functional goal is kind of pointless. So with that understanding of written language and how grammar works, you then start reading and you start understanding the point of words and language. Much so, we're here in this material world, and that's great, and we should enjoy that, but that's not the point. Maybe the point is that we are materially embodied to then understand more. Like that, and he hasn't discussed it yet, and I don't know if he will, but certainly, I mean, he kind of touches upon it early on, why material things exist at all, but we could certainly imagine that it is not bad that we are here in material forms. There is a purpose for it.
Right. I mean, that goes into a discussion of whether this world is a fallen world or not, or whether it was intentionally crafted. I mean, there's a sort of, in antiquity, there were people who believed that the world was
Right.
effectively some sort of mistake, an error of creation, and that we're
Well, I think he would disagree with that, because those were the
Right.
Gnostics. I don't think, I mean, he starts from the
Plotinus
beginning.
doesn't. I don't think Plotinus thought that.
No, he says it's the natural evolution of emanation for things to generate.
The forms lead to the soul, and the soul
Right.
has a desire for them, and so the natural expression is material reality, which is an expression of the forms in material form.
And that I'm assuming that they should return to the one. I think it's, or
Right.
as I think Carl Sagan said, I think it was Carl Sagan that said, we are the universe that is, I am misquoting those completely, but that we are just the ability that we are, in a sense, the universe having the ability to contemplate itself.
Right. We're not separate from the universe. We are extensions, albeit very minor, of the universe, but we have this seemingly anomalous ability to reflect on what the universe is and is not, and how it came to be, and where we are in this grand history of the universe.
And that's more of a materialistic down upward mentality, though, of like the unconscious, the unsentient universe developing to such a point that complex organisms develop that then have sentience to then contemplate themselves, but that on a atomic and molecular level, we actually are of the same stuff, or stardust or whatever. Obviously,
we're stardust.
Right. But the universe itself, with the context of what we're talking about, is a mere aspect and a material aspect, or an impression of the one. The one encompasses more than just the universe. But just to draw a similar example from like more contemporary culture, I guess, the material is here to serve as a tool to then get back to understanding the nature of reality on a higher level.
Right, and having that sort of, teleology in mind, that purpose of matter, also orients, I think, your life toward the study of philosophy, of meaning, of truth, of ethics, and so forth. So you turn away from the sort of base instincts that are oriented around matter and all of our, desires and emotions and instincts that are tied to it, and then you orient yourself towards something higher, and that, I think, also facilitates a good state of mind as well, because, as you properly pointed out, that you no longer see the normal everyday life, the mundane life, as a priority. Whereas, I mean, as I'm sure most of us can attest to, like when you're a teenager, the material world and your world, everything has a different set of priorities attached to it. So
Right. You haven't fully developed though. Even like
yeah,
Plato says such that, or was it Plotinus? When we were talking, I mean, maybe they both say it, but we were talking about it last time or the first time in the first episode about, I think he was talking about it, about like infants not like really being developed yet or having an intelligible aspect to them yet. And I mean, teenagers are still, they're much more whole at that point, but they are still physiologically and also, I guess, metaphysically, for lack of a better term, still developing.
right, right.
And I guess what I said, like, take it like, okay, well, then why are we here at all? What's the point of being here to just go back? Who knows? Because he also talk, or Plato talks about the idea that there's reincarnation, the idea that, and I think I get so confused, which, because we talk about both a little, or I reference Plato a lot, and I never remember if Plotinus brings these up or if it's only in Plato, but the idea that once every human, or every not every human, but every like embodied sentient being reaches a certain point of, through cyclical reincarnation, once they've reached a certain height, I think it was Plato, because he said that women were not were inferior, but
Hmm.
that eventually everyone will just return to just being part of the intelligible realm, or the one, or whatever. So once everyone does that, then what? I mean, so this is kind of going beyond the discourse of the dialectic, but I guess perhaps even this is another like idea in various mythologies and worldviews throughout history of the cyclical nature of reality. Maybe once we all return, all sentient material life returns to being part of the intelligible, returns to being part of the one, it all starts all over again. Because it is the nature of the one
Repetition.
to emanate, and the intelligible emanates the soul, and it's the nature for that to generate material. So who knows if this is the case, how many innumerable eternal iterations of existence there have been, or the existence of things beyond the one, even though she or she, whatever, it is outside of time.
Well, my sense of that is that material reality is where we observe time, and that
Right.
the serialization of experience happens in material reality, but not at the level of the forms. It's not at the intellectual level, and it's
But do you
not at
think
the
there's ever a point at which even the material reality gets reabsorbed, like where all things reincarnate to the point where there
I
is no
think
longer a material reality, and then it starts over?
I see it not as that our temporal reality has some sort of real, tangible, solid, eternal quality to it, but it has almost like a dreamlike state to it, and that at the higher level there is no time, and
Right.
there is no space either, and so
Right.
that there never actually, from that point of view, there never really was a past and a present and a future, as we
But
would
what about in
perceive
the
it.
material world? Like,
In the material, but in the material world, yeah, but it's at the
do you
same
think the
time.
materiality has a cyclical nature or not? I guess, or do you? I don't know. I kind of see what you're saying, kind of, which then creates this kind of
But that's a cause.
contradiction.
But that's a cosmological question
Right.
ultimately, of like, well,
Yeah.
when does the world exist and when does it end? And from our human perspective, yes, there is linear time, and that there is a creation point where our planet comes to exist, and there will be a point where the planet ceases to exist. But that's also giving a great deal of attention to something that might not actually be so important to this project of ascension, because there, as we are expressions of the one, we're not actually separate from it even now. We just have this ignorance clouding our understanding, and absence of wisdom. So from a higher perspective, this sense of cyclical time or linear time is basically a byproduct of emanation.
But the soul must exist in some outside, or Well, I guess at the point of the soul, that is when the world soul or the universal soul or whatever, the ultimate soul, that is where it seems the membrane between time, outside of time and time starts existing because it generates material.
Right. So in Plato's Timaeus, the demiurge creates the sun, the moon, the stars, and the rotation of them to indicate the passage of time. So I mean, he's using that in a figurative sense, but what that means is that time exists and the perception of time exists at that level, and it's not at the higher level. So
right, I agree.
So it's at the level of the descended soul. Yes.
So I guess my question is just like, I wonder if at the level of the descended soul, all of material at some point stops existing and linear time stops existing and then restarts once the emanation restarts and it gets to the point of the demiurge. Well, there's an argument about whether the demiurge is the one or some lower thing. I think he's talking about the one, but whatever. I think they're synonymous. There's a lot of different opinions upon this. But anyways, beyond that, just is there a point where time does stop existing because everything gets reincarnated or reabsorbed up to there's the one again, and not that the part where the one and the intelligible, which is an emanation, is not, that part is not linear, but there is a point where the soul generates material becomes linear. So if that aspect, I guess only at that level is there a cyclical nature of, I mean, this is not, I'm not expecting like an answer, like, or just like kind of what you think about it. Just because ultimately, yes, it's not directly tied to what we're talking about, but ultimately, if you take to its like logical end, what Plotinus is saying could happen is that as you become more and more enlightened, basically, you should eventually not be reincarnating anymore. And if you can apply this to, I don't know if he does, but like other aspects of reality, like of things that are not sentient, do they reincarnate? Is there some sort of aspect of those things evolving towards sentience eventually and then reaching a point of reincarnating and no longer reincarnating? Is there a point where all of materiality reascends, and which therefore in that aspect, the cyclical aspect of soul generating material would have to start again? This kind of idea of like just the material time, linear time aspect of reality maybe does have kind of a, I don't know, a big bang, big crunch, or cyclical existence, which exists in a bunch of religions, or older religions anyways.
But that's effectively, in my opinion, is like asking if an illusion has an experience of time, because at a higher level too, our personas of like, I'm Jeff, you're Sylvia,
But it doesn't exist.
I have a continuity from birth to death, and if there is reincarnation, metempsychosis, then my future life will have a start point and an end point, and it will interact with other people and so on. But that's also basically asking phantoms how their experience is. But the problem is that we're so caught up with our own continuities of existence that we tend to emphasize and pay so much attention to that serialization of experience, whereas ultimately there was no like absolute time and continuity of experience to begin with. What there is effectively basically a cloud of ignorance, and what actually happens once that ignorance is gone, maybe the realization is that there really was no fundamental difference between you and the one at all to begin with. And how that actually is supposed to play out for the rest of your life, I don't know. We'll have to continue reading, and maybe we can see how that happens. But in my personal view, I think once you step beyond this sort of temporal existence and you see things from his higher perspective, then it's effectively like it's like a difference between seeing things as a child and seeing things as an adult. You see things very, very differently. But the problem is that as material entities, we're very much obsessed with this perception of time. But the reality is that it is effectively like a phantom. It is like the images projected on the cave wall. And if you step beyond it, then you see something far greater. But the problem is that it's very difficult to do that. And maybe even for good reason too, because, you know, if you abandon all sense of time, then you would probably end up becoming very self-destructive. And I tend to think that humanity and all, you know, living beings are endowed with a certain amount of, you know, divine guidance. So for whatever purposes, we do have these instincts and this sense of, you know, time and the importance of time and so forth. And so it's there for a reason. But if you, you know, graduate beyond that, then you see another level of reality. And I don't claim that I've actually seen it to any great depth, although I think I've had some glimpses, glimpses of this in the past. And so, but the endearing thing though is that once you step beyond this, then you don't have to worry about Jeff going from birth to death and some sort of future lifetime either, because ultimately this whole continuity has been an illusion. It might be sometimes enjoyable, sometimes it's aggravating, sometimes it's very painful, but ultimately it's all just a phantom. And
Well,
that
I guess
doesn't mean,
the point is, like, I guess reconciling, if Plotinus doesn't think that this is a fallen world, or does not think that the good is capable of doing things that are not good, why even bother with this illusion, as you call it? But
because it's just the inevitable expression of the soul.
but why are
which-
we? Yeah, but then, like, why are we supposed to reascend? Like, I don't know. Let's not make this cyclical, because I've now asked the question
Right.
4 times.
Right. We'll have to continue reading and then we'll come to
Yeah.
an
And hopefully
understanding.
the shroud of ignorance for me will dissipate a little bit.
Right. Okay. Well, do you have any final thoughts?
Study math when you're in high school. It'll help you ascend later in life.
Definitely. I would agree with that. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for listening, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye.